All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to class 4 of Tonalism class. And today we're going to be talking about depth and perspective, which is super fun, super important, and really helps us to get a sense of space in our paintings. So I'm just going to instantly jump over and we're going to look at a number of paintings. We're going to do it fairly quickly, but I kind of want you to think about, where is the subject? Is it in the foreground? Is it in the midground, or is it in the background? And then I also want us to look at how the artists are conveying that sense of depth. And we're going to look at a number of different ways that artists do it. All right, everybody sees my little list of paintings here?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to start off with my buddy Anton Pavlenko. Some of you have maybe seen this painting. This is a painting we were out together painting. But what I really liked that he did was create this kind of almost like stage, like theater type separation in the scene with these gigantic trees compared to these buildings. But look at the how these trees really come forward compared to these mountains. So this is kind of an example of almost having two levels, kind of a midground and a background, a little tiny bit of a hint of a foreground. And can you guys see how he's doing that with color shifts, temperature shifts, and very strong value shifts, right? The lights and the darks. This is Arthur Frank, another artist that we talked about last week. Early California painter and furniture maker. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading here. Perspective, depth, and space in painting. One of the most significant contributions to realist art is the discovery of perspective. Accurately portraying perspective in your paintings is critical, as viewers will instinctively know if something is off. Perspective and depth is one of the primary tools we have to create a feeling of depth. We can use many design tools to enhance the effect of perspective. Now we're going to start listing a number of ways that we can create a feeling of space. All right. We've got lines like fence posts or tree trunks can convince viewers they're traveling off into the distance as they get smaller and less distinct. You see that? The big tree up here, and then it's kind of mimicked by a smaller tree in the background. And this tree has much more information and detail in it. And then as it kind of recedes back, we just have this kind of mimic of shape and design, but this tree obviously is further away. I don't know if I have really good examples using like fence posts and things, but this also talks about the next one, which is proportion, right? So big things come forward oftentimes, smaller things recede. But I want you to look right here. What do we have? It's almost a similar shape, right? You guys see this bush up here?
Yeah.
So if we're dealing with proportion sizes, then instinctively this should be further away, correct?
What?
Because we're using something called overlapping, right? All of a sudden we know that this is just, oh, it's much smaller than this tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's in front of that. Foreshortening, if you're doing like figure painting and things like that, is a great tool, and sometimes can be used in landscape, like with roads or anything that's coming forward. If there was a log laying here and it got bigger as it came towards us and smaller as it got out into the water here. Position. This is one that I think catches a lot of people here. So the position, I always think of it in accordance to the horizon line. So imagine our horizon line's kind of going across here somewhere. So lower from the horizon line, and we want to look at the base of the object. The lower away from the horizon line, the closer it feels. So even though, you know, these grasses are small, and then you get back and these trees are much larger, but because they are further up, closer to the horizon line, we instinctually know that they are further away. And it's funny, right? Like we think of all these things as like really obvious, but it's amazing how once we catch on, and sometimes our paintings are just off and we're just like, oh, the position, the base, where they land compared to the horizon line is off, and that will really help. Another one that I like to use quite a bit, and I love this painting. This painting really affected me when I first saw it a long time ago. It's Charles Warren Eaton, and really realizing that you could have warm backgrounds, right? Because we'll talk about a little bit about that. But clarity, having, you know, you can tell there's a couple strong grasses here, even though it's a very soft and hazy painting overall. Things get softer and softer and hazier until we get back to like this area. We don't even know what's really going on. We think maybe there's a tree, some buildings, some more trees, but they're really nondescript compared to the foreground. So here's another example of clarity, like stronger, harder, crisper shapes want to come forward, and soft edges want to recede. So a lot of times if your mountains are overbearing, you can just soften the edges or soften the edges in the midground. And that really helps to bring items forward. So again, we've got lines like fence posts or tree trunks. We've got proportion, the size of things, right? See the bigger trees compared to the little trees back there. We've got shading, the values will often be darker. And when I'm thinking about like the shading of things, I am looking into the shadows. What I find really interesting is that the shadows get darker, but a lot of times the colors don't change as much in the lights, right? They can still be really strong, but as long as you see how much lighter the shadows are up here than they are down here, and that just gives us that sense and feeling of depth. Looking into the shadows of these trees, even though it's kind of a washed out scene by Clyde Aspenbig. And then we look back into these mountains and how they just really fall back, right? I grabbed this one because I find it really interesting. If we're thinking about foreground, midground, and background. So we've got the foreground here, things up close, the midground kind of, you know, in the middle, and then the background. I found it interesting that he put all of his attention into the midground, right? Which is pretty common for a lot of paintings. Sometimes we can put a focus in the foreground and kind of use the background as supporting details. And some artists will actually put the focus in the background. So I want us to start to think about that here. The figure-ground relationship. This refers to the separation or lack thereof of the focal object in positive space from the background, the negative space, right? Foreground, middle ground, background. Foreground, middle ground, and background refer to areas in space. The foreground is the area nearest, the background is in the distance, and the middle ground occupies the space in between. These concepts are defined by their relationship and can be applied in any context, from intimate still lifes to vast landscapes. All right, so I want, when you're starting to look at, you know, paintings this week on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you are in the gallery, start to look at that. Like, what is the separation of space? Positioning the focal point. The position of your focal point in terms of the foreground, middle ground, or background influences your work's overall appearance and impact. Focal point in the foreground appears close and intimate. Let me close this and pull up one where it's really obviously in the foreground here. Right? We get the strong contrast. And it's played up actually against the background here, where you get this nice contrast in this area. But really the focus is here, and all the rest is supporting information. Jan Schmuckel, I'm not sure how to say the last name for sure, but they do almost all crisp edges in their paintings, no matter what the distance. Some soft edges, which is something I don't do very often. I really like using edge quality to separate my depth and perspective, but maybe that's just because I live in the Pacific Northwest, where there's so much atmosphere in the air.
It looks posterized.
It definitely, Jan Schmuckel does a lot of like posterization. Here's Jennifer Deal, who used to live here in Oregon, but has since moved. And you can tell, like, again, the focus is like, it's using the foreground, right, in contrast with the background. But then you have this really soft edge, warm light, and just Jennifer's such a great painter. But you guys see that, the foreground objects, you know, these trees kind of peeking in, which I often talk to you guys maybe not to do, but it can be really useful as a framing device. And then a lead in, getting us into the midground, and then the background back here. All right. Where was I? Okay, positioning the focal point. Position of your focal point in terms of the foreground, middle ground, and background influences your artwork's overall appearance and impact. Focal point in the foreground appears close and intimate. Focal points in the middle ground appear balanced and natural, with the foreground leading the eye toward it and the background providing contrast and depth. So that's probably one that I use more often, is kind of keeping my focus kind of in the midground, and often playing that off the background, whereas the foreground for me oftentimes is a lead in. And you guys see like the telephone poles using lines to create the illusion of space. And you've also got lines in the road or in the dirt road here that are going towards each other, right? They get closer as they get further apart, wider apart from each other as they come towards us. And I know you guys are like, oh man, it's also obvious, but it's something that's really great to just know all of the different tools. You don't have to use all of the different tools in your painting, but just having the ability to know that they're there is really great. All right, let's see if we can find one with a focus on the background here. I'll grab some. This is kind of an example, or here's like, yeah, here we go. So Ramona Youngquist, who we've looked at a lot of her work, right? There's a lot of contrast, you know, in different areas in the painting, but I really feel like this patch back here is the focal point, right? So you got this foreground kind of leading us in. We've got some of the radiating lines. Big patch of trees. If I had done this, I would probably cut a hole somewhere into them so it just didn't look like a wall, but you know. And then we have another guideline taking us back here and moving us back. So a focal point in the background, it appears ambient and vast, drawing the eye through the painting. A strategy particularly effective for dramatic sunsets and sunrises. Do you guys agree that the focal point, when you look at this, is back here?
Yeah.
Yes.
She also has like guidelines here, so it's almost like she's mimicking this. She's got that swath of light coming across. Transitions between areas. In some cases, it might be appropriate to exaggerate the nature of a transition between two areas in space. You can make the transition appear sharper or smoother depending on the idea you want to convey. Smooth transitions make a different area in space appear less distinct and help the viewer's eye travel between them. Color gradation, adjusting colors, light, dark, warm or cooler, or richer and duller can create smooth transitions, which is especially effective for vast and atmospheric landscapes. I really like his use of warm light, right? And why do you think that, part of the hill is a cool gray and then part of it is a bright pink?
Because that's what that is.
Yeah, the direction of the light.
Direction of the light, and what else is happening in these hills as you come
Atmosphere.
forward? Yeah, there's atmosphere, there's like fog or mist or whatever else that's catching. And so then the light gets into that atmosphere and bounces around and changes the color. You'll often hear people saying, as things recede into space, if we look into the shadows here, they get cooler and lighter, right? Again, looking into the shadows, cooler, bluer, gray, or whatever color you want. But then when you add atmosphere to it, and then the angle of the light, it can really change that up. Because the light is getting into that atmosphere from behind or from the side, bouncing around in all those particulates of moisture. And I love using this. I use this technique a lot, again, because we have so much moisture and atmosphere here in Oregon, that we get these really beautiful, warm, foggy effects that I just love and really look for.
It's interesting how atmosphere can affect a painting based on region. I have a friend that lives here who loves Colorado, does a lot of Colorado paintings, and was in a gallery in Colorado. And he was literally told by one of the galleries that if you want to have more paintings out here, you need to spend more time in Colorado because you're painting Colorado scenes with your Midwestern atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, go ahead, Cheryl.
Oh, no, well, yeah, that makes sense about the atmosphere. I notice that a lot when I get out west, which isn't very often. My question here is this. Technically, you're supposed to lose your red first. It goes in order, red, orange, yellow, how, they drop out. But in these paintings that we see, that doesn't fit the rule. I mean,
It's actually yellow is the first color to fall out. It goes yellow, red, blue.
All right.
So yeah, yellow has, I can't remember if it's the shortest wavelength or the longest wavelength, but yeah, yellow is the first color that'll fall out. And you can even see it just even here in this little area here. And so oftentimes I don't even need to reduce my chroma very much. I can reduce my color strength of yellow, make it a little redder, and then I start to incorporate blue. Let's see if we find a good example of that. So yeah, the yellow falling out, then the yellows become more reddish, and then they go back into the blues and greens. I don't know if that's a great example there.
No, it's there.
Jesse Powell painting from California. Right, I mean, even in the lights in the trees back here become redder compared up close. And it's not super mathematical a lot of the time, but you're just not going to probably see strong yellows in the background. The other thing that's really going to happen is the contrast in the shadows is generally much stronger closer, and then the contrast in the shadows becomes less and less as it recedes into space, which is really a great useful tool. Mark Bonet, he's playing this up, right? He's, all the reds are in the foreground, blue, greens, and then blues. He's really pushing it, but I think it's just got such a nice style effect to it.
This reminds me of your oak tree painting.
Yeah, a little bit, and you'll see a lot of the references I've gathered are kind of the California, just because that's what I've been thinking about, you know, Jesse Powell as well with the California Hills. Even the one that we just looked at by Michael Obermeyer is also the California Hills. And this is actually an effect I'm going to be using in a great big painting I'm working on, a 3 foot by 4 foot for the same family that I'm doing the smaller oak tree painting. This is the first painting I did of the scene I want to do today. And see if you guys want to do a paint along. So this is my first example of it, and I'd like to revisit it. And but I really like the fact of the depth and the space and kind of the movement through it.
Michael, can I ask a quick question on that, or any painting about atmospheric perspective versus artistic style? So, for
Which
example,
one?
in this, for
The
example, in
Mark
this
Bonet
painting,
one?
no, I mean that painting is fine. So let's say I want my main focal point to be in the mid-ground tree, right? And so and to make it like more sharp edges and probably like more contrasty. So
Right.
but that doesn't sit well with like uh, distance or like atmospheric perspective, because the front tree, shall I make it less blurry, or how does both these two things work?
Right. What I did was, you know, brought in, I changed the shape because the tree, the original shape is just a boring thing. So kind of bringing in some focus and some interest, some variety of form and shape. But yeah, also playing up a little bit more of the warmth. And yeah, I pushed some of the contrast here. If I really wanted to make that the focal point, I was trying to kind of do like a triangle here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, helping the eye move across the scene. But yeah, if you want to really make this, yeah, I would blur this, or I would make it less important, or you know, whatever, maybe less interesting. Yeah, but that's a great question. Let's look at like a T.L. and Lawson.
The edges aren't as distinct on that tree, the foreground tree as that was.
Right, yeah, exactly. Kind of blur it. And just imagine, Hassan, if you are standing there, or even when you're looking at your photo, just look at how does, if I tell you to stare at these trees right here, right? Now look at them closely, really focus on them. Don't move your eyes, but what happens over here?
Just goes.
Right? It just gets a little blurrier, softer, right? When you're really focusing here. Now look here at this hill line, tree line on the hill, right? Focus there, and now these trees become soft and blurry, right? If you just keep your eyes there. So that's how the human eye sees, is a selective, right? Otherwise, there's just too much information all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why they thought like the focal point needs to have like more sharp edges and yeah, like color and
Yeah,
whatever.
oftentimes.
Yeah.
Some kind of a contrast, usually. It could be, you know, lights and darks. It can be stronger lines, you know, like you said, a sharp line. There's lots of different ways that you can guide the viewer to look where you want them to look. You know, this tree is just the biggest, even though it's the furthest away, right? This bush. It's also got the most interesting shapes and forms in it. Also has the most, you know, interesting contrasts. He's also got things pointing at it. Right.
That's interesting. Even though like, yeah, the trees in the foreground has like probably more contrast and detail, but the mid-ground tree has that focal point, right?
Yeah, it also contrasts against the light. You know, and I don't think he's really, I think he's painting a scene here. This is Terry Saube, S-A-U-B-E. I'm not sure if it's Sauve or Suave. Yeah, you know, this seems to me to be the focal point, but it's not super strong. Like, you know, he's got this guiding line that goes away. Like, if you really wanted to play it up, you could have just flipped the road and made it going right to there, right? So there's sometimes where they're just like, you must look here. Other ones where it's very vague, right? Just kind a view that artist just kind of brings us up with the shadows. And then across with the clear cut up to here. And I'm not sure if this tree is meant to bring the viewer back down. Right? This is a good example of the yellows falling out, right? Going to the reds.
Mhm.
The more greens, and then the purples and blues.
Love the transition. It's very subtle, but like it's there.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when you really look at the foreground. Achieving balance. A distinct background, middle ground, and a distinct foreground, middle ground, and background can make for a balanced composition, but it's not always necessary. Sometimes excluding certain areas to convey your idea about the subject matter is better. Remember, balance, busy, and quiet spaces. Small area of busy space can have as much impact as a large area of quiet space. So in this painting, we've got this tree, right? This is the most busy, kind of interesting area. Got these contrasts of the dead stump and branch. And a lot, it's kind of got all the colors that are in the painting are kind of in this area. And the strongest contrast with lights and darks. And then you have this other area that's much quieter, right? And it kind of balances out. Yeah, I really like just how the artist moves us through this space. Slowly we get back. And then your reward is little things of smoke back here, representing probably man or something else. I kind of love like little hidden details. Use the rule of thirds. You guys remember that, where we split it into like a tic-tac-toe board?
Yes.
All right, so the focus is right here in that. This can help you find a pleasing balance in your composition, right? It's not always necessary, but I use it a lot, especially when I'm questioning things. Really love the use of atmosphere in this Terry Mayera painting. You can tell it's quick and gestural, but I just love that depth. And plus, I really like Terry's colors that he uses. All right, trust your instincts. Don't overthink it. If it feels right to allocate space in a certain way between the foreground, middle ground, and background, go for it. No more justification is needed. The theory shouldn't get in the way of a gut feeling. Keep the fun in painting. So I kind of write that every week, and my ending is, it's great to know all these things, but like I don't even get this foreground is so interesting, this big cliff face here. I've always really liked this painting by Russell Chatham. I just love the light, it's not even seen on the scene, but it's reflected down into the water. Russell Chatham is one that definitely kind of posterizes, but in very earthy colors, very harmonious paintings, right? But he kind of put the focus right on the edge, right? But then it kind of leads us through. So that's what I mean. Like there's rules, but I guess there's not rules. There's more like guidelines, more ideas. It's another Australian painter. They have there's a lot of interesting atmosphere in Australia, partly due to their gum trees, I believe I've heard, that they kick out a certain kind of oil or moisture to the air. I'm not positive about that, but it really gets a lot of Australian painters have a really strong sense of depth in their painting. And again here, Cheryl, we can see the yellow, right? And then it goes to the reds.
Yeah.
And then to the blues or purples. All right, let's see if there's any other examples that I grabbed that I really liked. I thought this was a really interesting one for you desert folks.
Wow.
That soft, the shadows almost squint your eyes, and this whole mountain almost disappears besides just the temperature shift, but it's almost just as light and values. So I don't know, Linda, do you see scenes like this sometimes when it's kind of dusty and really got a long, strong light still going on?
Yeah, all the time, the last couple of days, yeah.
And something we were talking about in one of the previous classes is the warm light and then the cold reflected light. Right, so it's not even a strong contrast, it's not light and dark in this case, it's just warm and cool, warm and cool, warm and cool. I just think that's so interesting and so brave. I would have such a hard time if I saw a scene like this out, you know, and I was out plein air painting. I think my instinct would still be to put lights and darks, just because that's how I understand form so well. But I just love this example of warm and cool. And then again, the recession of space, the recession of, even though the darks in the foreground are not very dark, they're much darker than the shadows back here, right?
That's morning light.
Yeah, probably so.
It would be interesting just to see the value of this painting. Like-
Right, yeah. I'd love to see
Warm.
that in real life.
Cool is probably like blend together, right? In a just value scale.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, Linus Berberian. There's a couple of you guys who I could see really enjoying his work. But I really love like these transitions in colors. See this kind of yellow, green up front, blue, green to the purples, to the blues. And those transitions, fantastic. Just in this very small part of the painting, right? Compared to the whole huge space, so much sense of depth and space. And then you've got the overlapping forms here. You got big to small, color gradation, temperature gradation.
Even the tops of those trees.
Right. Yeah, it was beautiful. It's
Look
got
at
the
the
kind
tree
of
top.
reflected cool light coming into areas, the warm light wrapping around in areas. Yeah, Linus is quite the painter, especially if you like color. Here's one where the focus is more kind of in the foreground. And this is, I really like the gestural elements that Mark Hansen's using here. But actually, I would say the focus is here, right?
Yeah.
This tree is working as a frame. And actually, he has more information in these middle ground than he does in the foreground trees. And then he keeps all of the detail close to the foreground. And then the background, I don't even know what's going on back there, right? No idea.
Trees.
I just really like the motion and the movement, and you can just tell he was having a good time with that painting. Right? What do you guys think of that? Of like kind of obliterating your foreground,
Yeah,
really letting the detail go away.
That's very brave, I would
He's
say.
making you look at what he wants to be the center of interest.
Mm-hmm. And just enough. I mean, I love like the little colors in here to kind of tie it in. Little bits of green, pink, red, purple, but not really strong, right? They're all staying within the same value. Yeah, I really like this painting by him. It just feels like, again, a poem. Like it's just kind of like, yeah, it's about this. This is a frame for that. Here's a little bit of extra information to help tell you this. It's got some lines kind of leading in a radiating fashion, leading us back there. Great work, Mark Hansen, as always. And this will be one of our last ones. And this is Frank Serrano, another California painter. And he does a lot with atmosphere and depth and fog. And I just thought, you know, you see this a lot when you're out at the coast, Oregon, California, especially Northern California, where the fog just really lays in and all of a sudden the trees just become silhouettes. And I really think that's cool, playing off the warm. So again, the yellow fading back, just very quickly it all drops away. There's probably an ocean back here. We don't even see it because of all the fog, or we're just looking too high.
Question.
Yeah.
Is that you don't really know because we didn't see it being painted, but is that background that is in it with so atmospheric, is it painted that way or is it glazed over to look that way?
I imagine he painted it that way.
Okay,
But you can use, glazes or scumbling to come back in. Here's a Edgar Payne. And he may have done some glazing or scumbling, but I believe he actually probably also just painted this to look, really just like, made like his shadows much lighter in value. Trying to find one other really highly detailed painter. Oh, here, Dennis O'Heaney. Look at how detailed this artist is. Right. Another good example of the yellows fading back to the warm reds. Yeah, this guy is kind of amazing, but really just so many little brush marks. I mean, even the hills are just all these little tiny brush marks in them. But he's keeping the values keyed in, right? So you look into the shadows, and the darkest darks generally kind of come forward towards us. He's got some pretty dark ones here. But then nothing gets nearly that dark back here, right? Also, the vibrancy is much stronger closer it gets to us, right? The colors are more pure. The shadows are more pure. And then as they get back, and then squint your eye, or eyes, plural, squint both of them. It really helps to show how this mountain is just back there, right? There's a little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of depth. Isn't that beautiful?
Where
Yeah.
did you say his focal point is?
I almost feel like it's here.
Yeah, the mid-range, mid-ground,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, because he's played these down. Actually, the colors aren't quite as strong in the light as they are back here. So, and I just see this strong line, kind of, everything kind of leading back. And then you see a little bit of an S curve here.
Right,
So I feel like it's here. It could be argued, and if Dennis was here, maybe he would tell us exactly. But I feel like that's where I'm meant to travel to. Again, so many lines coming towards that.
what's his last name?
Doheny.
Okay, thanks.
All of his work is pretty extraordinary, but not, yeah, it would make me crazy, I think. Okay, any questions about depth and perspective and using line, overlapping, proportion, foreshortening,
Sure.
position, and clarity?
Yes,
Any questions, you guys?
would you repeat all of that? Please? I'm joking.
Yeah.
In the handout.
What is that position about? I think I
The
missed that.
position is compared to the horizon line. So again, if we
Okay.
imagine the horizon line, so we know that these trees are much further back because the base of them is right on basically at the horizon line, right? We know this shadow is a little closer just because it's a little lower, and then we've got all the way up to here, right? So we know that the base of things tell us where they are in the opposite goes, for in the clouds, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got proportion, like in these poles. Proportion is in the path here, proportion in the trees, right?
Yeah.
Smaller. And then if you want something to be smaller but closer than these trees, right? Then we have overlapping. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Yep.
What
All
is
right.
what is foreshortening?
Foreshortening is like a lot of times, again, foreshortening would be like this. Look it open here. Foreshortening is when things come towards you, they get bigger. So a lot of times I think of like if you're doing a model painting, painting from a model, or in your case, an animal, right? If you are close to them and their foot is like coming towards you, it looks much, much bigger than it would if, maybe the other leg is over here. right? So things get bigger as they come towards you, is basically foreshortening. So, you know, look at the grasses here getting bigger as they go back, or the road gets wider as it comes towards us, gets smaller as it goes back. A lot of times in landscape, just logs kind of leaning across. I meant to grab a painting by Scott Christensen that uses that to great effect. You've got a number of, it's like a bunch of logs that had fallen in a river, and they really help lead the eye into the painting. So foreshortening just means getting bigger as it comes closer to the viewer.
Sometimes it changes the shape of something, like when you're looking at a tree and there's a limb coming straight toward you.
Yes,
It
exactly.
really change, you don't see the whole thing, you only see part of it.
Right, let me do stop share here and I'll show you. All right, so everybody sees me,
Yeah,
right? You see both my hands? I
yeah.
give up, you win.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
How much bigger
Yeah.
that is, right? My hands are smaller than my head when they're this close. Much, much bigger, right? So that's foreshortening.
Point one of them directly toward that's the angle that I have trouble with sometimes, because it changes, like a limb doesn't have the shape it needs to have. You only see bits and pieces of it when you're looking straight on.
Right, yeah, it can be really tricky. But foreshortening is a great tool. You know, kind of like if we were doing like a, you know, drinking coffee together and doing a cheers,
Yeah.
whole different effect, right? All right, so there we go. I'm gonna take a quick break and jump up to the easel, and we're gonna start our demo painting. And if you guys want to use that as your homework for this week, I would love to have you join me. Feel free to edit and change as you want. And then we will take a quick look at everybody's work on Padlet after that. So let's take you guys want a 5 or a 10-minute break here?
10 minute is fine.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So be back at 10:40 my time.